evening and welcome to our weekly Tzutzes HaParsha, Sparks, Tidbits on the weekly Torah portion. This week, it's the Parsha of Ki Savo. It's a Parsha that has in it a section that we refer to as the Tochacha. Tochacha meaning the words of rebuke. These are very harsh. One could refer to them as threats or curses that will fall the people if they do not follow God's commandments. And they're very difficult to read. They're very graphic, very horrific, and it's customary when the Torah reader reads the Tochacha that he reads it in a softer tone, and as a way of saying this is not very comfortable to read. But there's a story told of the first Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, would read the Torah, public reader, as it's called in Hebrew, the Bal Koreh, every week, except when he was out of town, someone else would read the Torah. Well, one week, this was Parsha this week, and the Alter Rebbe's son, who later on succeeded him as the second Chabad leader, who was then before Bar Mitzvah, heard the Torah reading and he fainted. And he was very ill to the point that he was not able to, there was a question whether he was able to fast 2-3 weeks later on Yom Kippur. And when they asked him why he took it so hard, because he said he heard these horrible curses, but you heard it last year and the year before, and he was a precocious child, so of course he understood, and he was able to fully comprehend what was written. And his answer was, when my father reads, I don't hear curses. And there's a double meaning in that. Number one, when his father, literally his father, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, he imbued those curses with such a deeper understanding that he was able to penetrate into the core of these curses, that they are actually blessings. But blessings that come out through a euphemism by the opposite. In Hebrew, we have an expression, Lashon Sagi Nohar, which means euphemistically, but the word Sagi Nohar means a lot of light, and it's the word used in the Talmud for a blind person. That's where the word euphemism comes from in Hebrew, Sagi Nohar, someone who has a lot of light. What does that mean? What that means simply, you would think, is that a blind person, you don't want to call him blind, so you use a positive term. But isn't that mocking him? Telling a blind person that he could see very well, telling a person who can't walk that he can walk very well, that's not something that they would like to hear. Well, in Hasidic thought, we're told that the truth actually is that the reason why the person is blind is not because there's a deficiency in his power of vision, the power of vision which comes from the soul. In fact, he has very powerful spiritual vision, too powerful so that the body, the organs of the body are not capable of expressing or reflecting that light, and that's why he can't see. So it's really saying is that someone who has what we would now call a handicap actually has very powerful spiritual energy that cannot manifest itself in the body. There's something missing in the body in its ability to be able to respond to the energy coming its way. In the same way, the curses that we read are not truly curses. They are really expressions of powerful spiritual positive energy, but because it's so powerful, it can manifest itself in a negative way. If you are the right person, like the Alter Rebbe, when he read it, you were able to feel, certainly a child as sensitive as his son, Rabbi Dov Ber, later on called the Mittel Rebbe, the middle Rebbe, as he was so receptive, he heard the blessings, so it didn't affect him adversely. But when someone else read it and all you heard was the shell, the external aspect of it, that was too powerful a negative experience for him, and being the sensitive child he was, he couldn't handle it and he fainted. So this is the parsha that deals with hidden blessings, and that ultimately all these hidden blessings will become revealed blessings in an overt and open way in the coming of Mashiach. Now, one of the reasons given for the negative threats or so-called curses, the Torah says, is because you didn't serve God with joy. From that we see the centrality of joy in Judaism. The simple meaning of that is that a person who has a good life and is happy about everything else, materially speaking, but they don't find any satisfaction and happiness in the spiritual life, that is itself a curse. When you can lose sight of the value, the treasure, the beauty, the excitement of the spiritual, of doing a mitzvah, of learning Torah, that itself is its own curse. But the theme of simcha, of joy, is actually hinted, and even more than hinted, in the very beginning of the parsha. For example, the very opening verse reads, "And it will be, when you enter the land that God your God gives you as an inheritance, and you take possession of it and dwell in it, then you shall take of the first of every fruit of the ground that you bring in from your land that God your God gives you, and you shall put it in a basket, and go to the place that God your God will choose to make his name rest there." And then we take the first fruits and we bring it to the temple, and we give it to the Kohen. And then we goes on to say in verse 5, this is chapter 26, verse 5, "Then you shall call out and say before God your God," and we go through a whole recitation thanking God for all the things, the good things that he did for us. And at the end of this section, it talks about how, verse 11, "You shall rejoice with all the goodness that God your God has given to you in your household." So what we see over here is that this ceremony that accompanied the bringing of the first fruits was a ceremony that had extreme amount of joy associated with it. You had to show your gratitude and joy go together hand in hand. And you had to express your gratitude. You shouldn't show that you're an ingrate, and do it with simcha, with great joy. So that's a reference to joy, explicit reference, but it's also hinted, and perhaps that defines the whole parsha by its first word. Although the parsha is referred to as savo, kisavo, when you enter, I'll soon show the connection to joy in that as well. But the first word is v'haya, which is not a very expressive word. It means it will be. It will be. It shall come to pass. But the Midrash tells us that whenever the word v'haya is written in the Torah, it's an expression of joy. Whenever the word vayehi, and it was, past tense, that's an expression of sorrow, anguish. What's the difference? So one of the commentators explains that whenever you focus and dwell on the past, and you wallow in the negativity and the grief of the sorrow of the past, and there's plenty of it, then that person is not a very happy person. But when you look forward, you're able to put the past negativity behind you, and you look forward, then it's an expression of joy. And that's especially appropriate as we come into a new year. Some people can be bogged down by the stock taking that is important to do in this month of Elul, and become so fixated on the negatives that they were involved in the past year that they can't look forward to the new year. And that's contrary to the whole spirit of Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah occurs in the 7th month, the Torah says. Even though it's the head of the year, it's the 7th month. What that means is that, on one hand, it's a continuation of what happens before. You have to prepare for it by reflecting on the past year. But then you're able to put everything behind you and start a new year. In the middle of the year, you could start a new year. So V'haya is an expression of joy. Now, what is the joy over here? The joy is that you enter into the land. The fact that you can enter into the land of Israel, that itself is a great source of joy. Why is that a source of joy? Because Israel is a place of joy. Why is Israel a place of joy? What about every other country in the world? Well, the answer to that is that joy is associated with God. Wherever there's joy, wherever God exists, there is joy. As it says in biblical verses, in Psalms and other places, Oz v'chedva bimkomo, that in God's place there is joy. If a person is in a depressed state, they cannot be receptive to the divine presence. A prophet can only be a prophet when he was in a state of joy. It says when a person starts praying and they want to have a relationship with God, it has to be through simcha, through joy. God does not like sadness and depression. Yes, there are times when we have to be sad for the terrible tragedies that occurred, but even in the sadness, there has to be an underlying sense of joy. But coming into the land of Israel is conducive to joy. Why? Because that's the land that we just read a few weeks ago in the Torah, that God's eyes watch over from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. That's where God's presence is much more pronounced. So that's a place of joy. So when you enter the land, you have joy, you have simcha. That's one point to it. Another point is the word tava, which literally means coming into, enter the land, because there are two ways you could physically be in a place. You could be traveling through a place. You could even live there 70 years, but you're just traveling through. Or you could enter into it. You could become internalized within it. The key to joy in life is when you find something that is a source of joy, whether it's doing a mitzvah, whether it's studying Torah, whatever is truly a source of true joy, enduring joy, but you have to be in it. If you're not in it, if it's only a superficial thing, it's fleeting, then you won't have the joy associated with it. Here it means you come into the land. You're not just walking through. You're not a tourist. You're not a guest. You're not a visitor. You're not a spectator. You are living there. You're into it. As the Torah continues, that God gives it to you as an inheritance. You will inherit it and dwell in it. Then you have the experience of simcha. One final point. This Torah portion comes on the heels of last week's portion, which concludes with the commandment to remember Amalek and destroy Amalek. Amalek was a wicked nation that tried to destroy the Jewish people. It was genocidal, and we are commanded to destroy that mindset. But Amalek is also an internal problem. Amalek is said to have the same numerical value as the word for doubt in Hebrew, suffix. There's an expression that there is no greater joy than the resolution of doubts. When a person is plagued by doubts and they're questioning and doubting, questions are all right, but when you start doubting God, start doubting the Torah, start doubting yourself, that is the greatest source of depression. A human being has to have clarity. They can ask questions, because every question has an answer, and every answer will have another question, and that's part of life. That gives a lot of excitement in life when you're constantly questioning and answering. But doubting is a defeatist approach, and it leads to depression. So when you get rid of Amalek, you get rid of the doubts, v'haya, that is an expression of joy. The Torah then goes on to talk about Bikurim, the first fruits, and what had to be said. And one of the things that are said when you bring the first fruits was a recounting of the history of the Jewish people, starting with Lavan, Jacob's father-in-law. And the Torah describes him as an Aramean who tried to destroy our father, Jacob. And that's a little bit puzzling. We don't find in the Torah, at least not explicitly, that Lavan, while he was a cunning swindler and he cheated Jacob and he wasn't nice to him, but nowhere does it say that he tried to destroy him. So there might be deeper meanings that suggest that he actually did try to destroy him. But one possible way of explaining what he tried to destroy, we say in the Haggadah, Bikesh, he sought, La Karas HaKol, to uproot everything. The word kol could also mean the collectiveness. The Jewish people are a people that stays together, that endures, that is immortal, because they are not just a collection of individuals, but they are a group, they are a nation, they are inherently part of a collective, and that collective, as the Talmud says, never dies. Lavan realized that Jacob had that power of consolidating his descendants, his children, his grandchildren, his descendants into a group that would last forever. Jacob is the epitome of collectiveness in a positive way. And he tried to destroy that, to take away that power from Jacob. He didn't have to kill him. If he took away that power and Jacob was just one mortal, one individual, then he knew the Jewish people would not last. He knew that they would not be unique. And that's what he tried to take away from him. The Torah then goes on to talk about the bringing of the tithes to the temple. That's a subject unto itself. And then it goes through the blessings and the curses. We already touched on that. Now, I mentioned before the verse that says that the reason why the curses have come is because you didn't serve God with joy. Now, if you look in the Talmud, it seems to suggest that the temples were destroyed not because of lack of joy, but because of senseless hatred. There was a lot of division amongst the Jewish people. And yet, the Torah seems to be suggesting that it's because we lacked simcha, we lacked joy. So one way of answering it, there's another passage in the Talmud that says, why was Jerusalem destroyed? Because we didn't say the blessing before studying Torah. But if you look in the Torah, in the Tanakh, it says the first temple was destroyed because of idol worship, bloodshed, and other terrible crimes. So why is it associated with not blessing on the Torah? And there's one answer to those two questions, that it's not blessing on the Torah doesn't result in the destruction of a temple. It's the sins that they did. But if they had appreciated Torah the way one should appreciate it, and they would have blessed and thanked God for it, if they would have shown gratitude, appreciation. If a Jew shows joy in the fact that he is a Jew, he revels in the fact that he or she is a Jew and has the greatest gift, the Torah, that anyone could have ever wanted and wished for, and that would generate such great joy, the Jewish people would have no vulnerability. They would not become so vulnerable that they could disintegrate into these different factions that were at each other's throats, bringing about internal destruction. They wouldn't have resorted to idol worship and bloodshed because they would have had this unity that would have never been able to dissolve. They would have had this receptivity to the divine that could never have been destroyed. It's the lack of joy, the lack of appreciation, of gratitude, that can cause the person to become vulnerable, and they can fall down this slippery slope that could end in the destruction. At the end of the curses, which are, as we said before, hidden blessings, it talks about the curses that are not written in the Torah. What curse is that? Not written in the Torah. And there's a famous quote, no one has ever found the original source for it, that it refers to the death of tzaddikim, the righteous people. Their death is not mentioned in the Torah. There's a cute little interpretation of that. What does it mean it's not written in the Torah? Generally speaking, there's a law that when you owe someone money, there's a lien on your property, and Jewish law allows the creditor to come and collect from your property if you don't pay him when the debt is due. But let's say you have different quality property. You have good property, average, and below average. A creditor can only collect from the below average. Well, if God takes away righteous people, it means he's collecting his debts. We owe him something, and he's taking away the very people that could have helped us, and we didn't listen to them. But he takes away the best. So that's not written in the Torah. That's not consistent with what is written in the Torah. One final insight, one of the last things where the Torah talks about how we will be sold as slaves. and no one will buy us. And right after that, it says, these are the words of the covenant. So there's a interesting and cute little anecdote associated with this. Rabbi Shlomo Kluger was one of the most prolific Talmudic scholars of the 19th century. And when his son tried to sell his father's book, he didn't find many people purchasing that. People were not interested. So he leafed through his father's manuscript, and he saw that his father had a comment over here. He says, what's the reason for the juxtaposition? No one's going to buy you, and these are the words of the covenant. He said, what it means over here is the curse is no one will buy the words of the covenant. People will not buy the Torah. People don't buy books. We're living in an age where, because of technology, people don't buy as many books, or maybe they do, but it seems that it's going that direction. And young people, we have statistics, don't read books. But being Jewish means that we have to read books. We have to read the Torah. We have to read the Talmud. We have to read all the holy text. And the Rebbe launched a 10-point campaign, and one of the 10 points is to have a bayis moli sfarim, a house filled with Torah books, filled physically, and the spirit of those books should permeate the whole home. That you live in a home that is governed by the message and the values of these holy books, so that the ultimate blessing is a reversal of this, that people will buy the books, and the books will inspire us and will lead to the time when, first of all, as we come to the holiday of Rosh Hashanah, when we want to be inscribed in the book of life. So by having these living books of Torah, this will give us the merit to be inscribed in the book of life. And as it says about the future Messianic age, that there are people who will merit to be written in the book. Those are the people that will survive, and they will merit the world to come. Well, one of the ways to bring that about is by having the book, owning Torah books, and taking advantage of reading them, learning them, and letting those books teach us and inspire us. Have a good evening and a good Shabbos.